chapter in Israel. I'm also the chairperson of the Israel-India Chamber of Commerce. We have with us friends and distinguished panelists, Mr. Rota Shmal, all the way from Delhi, Adi Wagman from AgriNation, Or Haviv from Arieli Capital, based in south of Israel, and Mrs. Narkis Tesler, and Mr. Amnon Ofen from Nandan Jain. We are here today to talk about what happens when agriculture meets technology. And this is the story of the Agritech in Israel. Before we continue, and I guess that many of you don't know Israel or know very little about Israel, I'll share with you some vital statistics about Israel that will put us on same page. And I'm talking about the fact that Israel is only 9 million people. 9 million people. For the Indian audience, maybe it's a neighborhood or two neighborhoods in Delhi or in Bombay. But this is the population of Israel, a very small country in the Mediterranean, in the Middle East. This is the map of Israel. We are surrounded by Egypt, Jordan, Libya, not Libya, Lebanon, and Syria. And in this really tiny country, we are growing all the crops that we were going to talk about today. I'll start with a question to our panelists, and I'll share with you a question. Each of you can answer that. Israel is an ecosystem of innovation that grew to be global center for agri-technologies, combining the traditional Israeli agriculture, and in my background, those are Selanova lettuce from an hydroponic farm. Mr. Mal, you know well this farm. We've been there together once. And the question is to you, Mrs. Tesler. Why do you think that Israel grew to be such agri-tech hub? And from your perspective, what of the many agriculture innovations that are developed here you are most proud of? And before you talk, I'd like to present you to the audience. Mrs. Narkis is the Chief Strategy at Medocan, a best-in-class indoor cannabis. Yes, cannabis is an industry in Israel, cultivation company located here. She also serves an advisor to several cannabis startups. She's the co-host of CannaCast, Israel Medical Cannabis Innovation Podcast. Prior to that, she held several executive positions in leading organizations in Israel and served as a director in both public and government companies. She holds BA from Emory University in Atlanta and an MBA from Tel Aviv University. So to you, Narkis.
Okay, hi, well, hello everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for inviting me. So the question was, why is Israel such an agri-tech hub? I think it's the power of necessity. We found ourselves, like you showed on the map, in an area that has very, very few natural resources.
Basically, Narkis, can you just hold on? Hazel, I don't see Narkis in the screen. Yes, thank you. Go ahead, Narkis.
I see myself. So we find ourselves isolated with very few natural resources, and basically we can't work with our neighbors to help each other out, at least in the beginning. Now things have changed. But it was basically the power of necessity. And a few years ago, I was a director in one of the government companies called Mekorot Development. It's a subsidiary of the water company here in Israel. And I learned there from that position that specifically in the water industry, we were so isolated and so on tech that we had to develop technologies for ourselves. And as we all know in agriculture, water is the basis of life. And I think it really started from back then. But if I may talk for a moment about cannabis and what's happening in Israel in cannabis, I'll say why we became a cannabis innovation hub. And this started about in the 60s when a professor in the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, Professor Raphael Moshulam, was the first person to study the cannabis plant and isolate the element of the plant that is gets you high, and the element of the plant that is more associated with the wellness. It's the THC and the CBD. So once he isolated those molecules, he was able to continue the study of these molecules, and that's how Israel began. Because it was illegal at the time, he was able to get the cannabis plant materials to learn about them from the police. He basically said to them, anything you can capture, I want to study in my laboratory, and they gave it to him. So Israel had kind of a time frame where we could continue the research when the rest of the world could not. So that's how Israel became a cannabis hub. So I think basically, back to your original question, the necessity of being isolated here in the desert and having to do on our own what we needed to do to survive, that was where it got started. And since then, we all know it's a high-tech nation, and Israelis are very innovative.
Thank you, Narkis. We will go back. We will come back to you to learn more about cannabis and what you do in your existing company and the industry in general. I'd like to pass the same question to you, Adi. Adi Wagman is the founder and managing partner of AgriNature Venture Capital. Prior to AgriNation, Adi spent 10 years in various management roles, including Coffee Joe, that was acquired later by the Delek Group. Adi is founder and investor of Tropic Biosense, a company in the genome editing domain in coffee and banana, and founder investor of Pets Epain, a company in the nutrition field of pets. She holds BA in business from an MBA from IDC Herzliya, and is also a graduate of the Samzel Entrepreneurship Program for outstanding students. So being an outstanding student, I'll be happy if you reply. What do you think is the most innovative, impacting Agritech solution that was developed here in the past 72 years, I would say, since our foundation?
So I'm really glad that Amnon is also part of our panel. First of all, thank you for inviting me, and always happy to take part in your initiative, Anat, and to show how great Israel in terms of Agritech. So definitely, when we are talking about Agritech in Israel, we are talking about two main elements. First is what we call the agricultural legacy. Since the beginning of Israel, we saw a lot of innovation and a lot of government support into agriculture. We're one of the leading countries in the world that has government support. Together in what we call the startup nation, all the innovation that we saw here and will continue to see over the last 20 years. When we combine these two elements together, we have what we call the Agritech powerhouse of Israel. I believe that not a lot of people know, but we are only the second in the world, second to the Netherlands in terms of agriculture productivity. And consider that we are 60% desert, it's very important and very, great fact about us. I think the drip irrigation is one of the main innovations that now showing the results globally in terms of climate change and the relevancy to agriculture. I think this is one of the main innovation here in Israel. And I think also that everything that's related into milking cows, that we are also leaders in the world. Probably less relevant today when we're talking about alternative proteins, but we're the first in the world in milking cow production. I believe that in the next decade, we will see more and more innovation around artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, that Israel has great strengths, and now we see this application being embedded into agriculture solution and going to deploy worldwide.
I think that what you said, Adi, talking about drip irrigation, and soon I'll pass the mic to you, Amnon. Narkis spoke about necessity and scarcity, and Netafim and the drip irrigation grew from necessity, from the fact that Israel has a very small water season, and in the desert, as you said, 60% of the country is desert, and that relates to you all that we will talk with you soon. We need water, and we need, as Mr. Modi said, every drop for a crop. Amnon, remind me, I mean, it was, we heard it together. I'd like to pass the mic to you, Mr. Offen. Mr. Offen used to be a professor in IIT, but not in the Indian IIT, but rather in the Israel Institute of Technology, the Technion. He is advisor to many Israeli companies about agriculture. He is a director at Nandan Jain, the JV between the Israeli irrigation company Nandan and Jain Irrigation from India. It's not JV anymore, actually. It's a wholly owned subsidiary of Jain Irrigation. He's an international expert in systems engineering and operation research. In our chamber, he won the Life Achievement Award a few years back. And he's also a member in the Public Council of Agrotechnology in the Israel Expert Institute. So, Amnon, you have perspective, and I'll be happy if you can share with us what made Israel to be Agritech capital.
Thank you, Anat. First, to correct something, NAN is the Israeli pioneer company in irrigation and also in drip irrigation. So it would you give credit to Netafim, but we're friends and all done by the Israeli private sector. And if you ask me why Israel became agricultural hub, is that agriculture, not like industry, is very complicated system. It contains a lot of factors in a sector, and you should be specialized in many other things. So in agriculture is based on 4 legs. So in Israel, these 4 legs are well connected. First leg is the government. Second is the R&D sector. Third one is the private sector, the irrigation or agriculture. And last is the farmer. Always during the years and days, there is interaction between all these 4 elements, which enable us to reach to be an agricultural hub in Israel. We treated agriculture as a system. We're not speaking about item, product. We're not speaking about dripper, sprinkler, or whatever. We are speaking about holistic approach from the feasibility study, supply the item, the irrigation system, the seeds, including the agronomic know-how, and then the marketing. So you'll not be able to find in the world companies which are well connected to the farmer and to the R&D, while sometimes the company themselves has its own R&D and they have their own knowledge which we giving to the farmer.
And okay, thank you, Mr. Offen. We will get back to you. Mr. Or Haviv is back with us. Hi, Or. Nice to have you with us. Are you really today in Eilat? You are mute. I need you to unmute yourself, Or. Okay. Or until you are able to unmute. If the organizer of this room can unmute Mr. Orr, that will be helpful. Hazel? Okay, until Mr. Orr is with us, not just the camera, but also the audio, I'll pass the mic to you, Mr. Rotashmal. Your mic is on?
I think so.
Good, good. So we always need the exterior perspective to tell us how good we are and how special we are. So I invited you today, Mr. Mal. Mr. Mal is the chairman and MD of EM3 Agri Services and also the chairman of Agribator Technologies, taking Israeli Agtech to India. Previously, chief executive of several leading companies, including Bharti Airtel, that the Indians know, Escorts Limited, charter member of Thai Delhi, I guess, and member of CII Agri Council, executive advisory committee of the Simon Business School and University of Rochester. And I think that your resume, I can talk for a day, but we will not be able to talk about what we are here, the Israeli agriculture. So, Mr. Mal, you came to Israel about 10 years back, I think, to scout for technologies here in food and food processing and agriculture. And why did you come to Israel? And what did you find?
I came first to Israel actually as a seeker, looking for some inspiration, solutions. I'd heard about this place, that corner of the Mediterranean, which was 1/3 the size of the Delhi national region, which was a rich source of intellectual oil. And I must say I was not disappointed. So that's what first brought me. It was 13 years ago. And now I think about 14, 15 visits later, I certainly do have a perspective of what makes you guys tick and do what magic you do. Another point I want to make out, and before I get started on that, you mentioned, if I got it wrong, the Israeli GDP as 390 billion, right? Well, that's the agri GDP of India. And therefore, also tells you the kind of playing ground, or the size of the playing ground that we have here, that's desperately looking for solutions in agriculture. We are actually potentially $1 trillion agri industry, and that's the upside. To your other question, what brought me here and why I think AgTech ticks, right? So I think I have the advantage of seeing you from a distance as well as close up. And I've made my own hypothesis about what makes Israel tick. And I'm really delighted. So first and foremost, I think the way you were born in a lot of backdrop of deprivation and struggle and so on. And a nation born in a desert is not an easy job. The second is some early discipline. I think all your people undergo military training. So I think in the bedrock of the country is built on discipline and education, which is something you attacked early. We didn't for a long time. I think we took a long time getting there. I think with that, if I meet an average Israeli and a very curious person, why? Also argumentative, which is brilliant. And you kind of get to the bottom of a lot of things. And then obviously all this will reach to a scientific temper, which is there. The other amazing thing that I find is that your pools of knowledge talk to each other. Biology speaks to physics, speaks to chemistry, speaks to engineering, speaks to software, speaks to deep tech. So the issue is not pools of knowledge that are standing by each other. They are threaded together. Let me put it like this. If all these were pillars, then the beams are already in position to hold the entire structure together, something that is missing in a lot of other countries, and therefore allows you to draw on the best of insights to get to it. And talking of insights, I think as a nation, you have stared at problems long enough. By stared, I mean deeply focused on problems. Now, for example, the innovation called drip irrigation, so on. What was the insight that came after watching this? It said, A, that the plants don't need water, they need moisture. Now, there's a big difference between the two. And the second is they need to be kept under stress, right? Which means that when you're under stress, like say your army or like your forces, an amount of stress actually makes you grow faster. And so those insights, take another insight, which is a recent insight, that plants talk to roots. Israel is beginning to hear the language that plants talk to roots.
There are
And
a few people here that talk to the plants also.
we thought they were batty, but I think they were far ahead of our times. So, and the last item, I think you understood cause and effect very, very deeply. You know, if you're working at splicing genes, this, that, you're working at almost at an atomic level. Then, of course, there's this cultural aspect. Your country is a country of Jews. My country is a country partly of Marwadis, which are Indian Jews, right? And when you add all that to monetization of knowledge, I think that's a powerful combination.
I mean, I must correct you that Jews are only 80% of Israel, and we have also diversity of 20% Muslims and almost 2% of Christians. So we have them all. Thank you, Mr. Mal. Mr. Chaviv, your mic is working? Yes.
I think it is. You tell me.
Yes, yes. Now
Wonderful.
I can hear and see you. So Mr. Chaviv is partner and head of global ventures in Arieli Capital. We met last when I came all the way down to the south, to the city of Eilat. For Israelis, Eilat is a place that you go for a vacation. So we envy the people that really live in Eilat. In Arieli Capital, or is leading the early stage growth and investment platforms that generate high net worth portfolios investments. He holds a decoration of excellence from IDF Commander of Chief for his service in the Special Forces, holds BA in Electronic Business Management from Dominican University of California, an MA in Conflict Management Resolution from Ben Gurion University. Just for the international audience, Ben Gurion is also the University of the South, based in the desert and researching desert innovations. So you are there, down there, as we say, and your Agritech, I guess, is a bit different from what we do in Central and North Israel. Can you share with us a bit more, about what are you doing in your desert agriculture?
Sure. I think that everything, first of all, I would like to say again, thank you for setting everything up and for providing this opportunity to speak. I think that the sector of agri and food is receiving a whole new approach these days. As we know, pre-corona time, the blockbusters used to be movies, Hollywood movies. Today, the blockbusters is the store next door, where you stop and stand in line for a whole block waiting for milk and eggs, which, by the way, Israel ran out of during the several times in the last corona lockdown. So I think that really agriculture is something that is very dear to our hearts, not just because we eat it. In my personal story, I have an entire side of my family who are agriculture farmers and come from the agricultural field, also in the desert. But I think that when you talk about Israel, you talk about pioneering, you talk about doing the impossible against all odds. And I think that when you talk about the desert, as you said, it's about 60% of Israel's landmass is desert climate. And one of the things that Arieli Capital did lately is join forces with Ramat HaNegev. Ramat HaNegev is the largest regional council in the country. They manage about a little over 20% of Israel's landmass. That's roughly about 1 million acres, which in Israel proportions is huge. And although it's desert, what they've succeeded in doing in the past 50 years is nothing short of incredible. If you visit there, our innovation center, you will see people growing things that you would never imagine that would grow in the desert. I'll give you a couple of examples. Berries. I've seen berries, you know, a big part of my life is in the Silicon Valley. You mentioned a little bit of it in the quick, very nice preview. But we know berries and strawberries from California, right? But you've never tasted a berry until you went to Ramat Negev. Huge and amazing, very tasty milk, dairy farms. Who would think, right? Milk arrives from places like, you know, Netherlands, that makes sense. But from the desert, by the way, the milking cow in Ramat Negev is the most productive cow, if I'm not mistaken, in the world, by far, okay? You will also see there people growing pineapples, you know, wineries. The New York Times in 2019 wrote a whole article about the wineries of Ramat Negev and how it is not only surviving, it's flourishing, and the New York Times named it the future of wine, okay? So at the end of the day, I think when you talk about Israel, it's innovation out of necessity. And when you talk about agriculture, since such a huge part of the country is desert, both my family and the amazing farmers in Ramat Negev have created models that are breakthrough, which means, I'll give you one example, they have an R&D center, applied science, okay? Not academic science, applied science. These are top researchers, all the way from the seed level to how you pack your food and extend the shelf life. These researchers are working hand in hand with the farmers every single day to make sure that they have what they need if they want to grow a specific crop that never was grown in the desert. And they do it, and they do it very successfully. And I think that if I have to summarize Israel and agriculture, I would say innovation out of necessity and basically doing everything against all odds, which leads to, I think, top level crops. And this region is responsible for amazing, amazing productions, including 70% of the produce that goes to the export, about 80% of Israel cherry tomato, 4.2 million acres, or dunams, sorry, or 1 million acres, 20 million liters of milk that's produced there, and really incredible produce. If you go there and taste it, you understand what I'm saying.
You really make me want to come and visit you again, or thank you.
Book a wine tour in Ramat Negev, which, by the way, you know, the tourism in the Negev area because of Corona is overbooked, because, you know, the hotels are closed in the major cities. Now Eilat is a green island, so a different story, but you know, the people are discovering the Negev and the desert, which is incredible. So book a wine tour in Ramat Negev.
You spoke about wine, and definitely I didn't think about it, but the wine industries in Israel is growing and excellent. And this is also agriculture. And actually my morning walks are in the grape area next to my home. So definitely it's a valid point. I'd like to go back to you, Narkis, because cannabis is fascinating. I mean, it's only 10 years since I think that cannabis was initiated in Israel. And I wrote in the paper yesterday that the price for a gram or 10 grams is actually the most expensive yield, I would say, isn't it?
Very expensive. It's very expensive for many reasons. But as I say that, it's much less expensive in Israel than it is, for example, in the States or in Canada or in Europe, for that sake, because we have been able to grow it more efficiently, again, using the technologies that we're speaking about here on the panel. And so we've been able to increase yields. We've been able to do those things that enable us to decrease the cost, because it's a very, very expensive crop to grow.
What's special about growing a cannabis and then cucumber or some other crop?
Okay, but in order to answer that, I have to explain a few things. Cannabis isn't one plant, as is cucumber. I'm sure there's very many strains, but in cannabis, it's not that just a matter of different strains. It's a matter
And
of
cucumber is a fruit, so different.
So it's not just a matter of the different strains. Each strain has a different cannabinoid profile. The cannabinoids are the active ingredients in the cannabis, and I'm talking about medical cannabis. Each profile, and again, there are about 140 different cannabinoids. So each combination is responsible for helping a different medical indication. So in order to grow per medical indication, we need to be able to grow the same plant over and over and over again. Now, this is the same, I'm sure, for tomatoes. But the difference is the plant is extremely, extremely finicky. Even the slightest change in humidity or in temperature or in the amount of light that we give it will affect the profile of the cannabinoids in the plant. So the challenge of achieving, in spite of all the other factors I spoke about, of achieving plant-to-plant, avoiding plant-to-plant variation is huge. What makes it, back to your original question, what makes it so expensive? It's highly, highly, highly regulated. In order to grow, you have to invest so much just in the regulations that by the end of the day, it's a matter of growing a simple plant. But to get to that initial stage of growing and having the license to grow, you have to go through so many loopholes and so many regulatory requirements. It's just very expensive.
But actually what you're saying, or what I deduct from what you're saying, that the prices will go down, because in the initial stage you make a lot of investment and you learn how to maintain the protocols, and we are expecting it to go down over the next 10 years, which will make it totally affordable for all the needy.
Absolutely. We expect it to go down in some parts of the industry more than in other parts of the industry, on the one hand. And on the other hand, all the legality issues, most countries, including Israel, is discussing it today, are legalizing cannabis and taxing it because they see here an opportunity for an additional tax revenue, similar to alcohol. And the taxes will just increase the prices again. So it's a very, very complex industry to be in, but very exciting because it's new and there's so much innovation going on. It's one of the most exciting industries I've ever been in.
I mean, we need to wait for the day that it will be subsidized.
There are countries where it already is. In the UK, medical cannabis is subsidized by the health system.
So I hope that someone listens to us today. Thank you, Narkis. It's fascinating, and the more I read and hear about it, it's more I understand that there is something unique in the cannabis industry. Mr. Offen, I'd like to pass the mic to you.
Yes.
Jain Irrigation came to Israel, it's already 15 years. When was it?
Continue. I will.
Continue. What an Indian company like Jain Irrigation looked in Israel? What did they look for?
Let me speak about Israeli agriculture, which is totally different than what is in India.
Okay.
In Israel, we have a big plot, while the average area of Indian farmer can be less than 1 acre. So it was a challenge how to implement, how to import or export the Israeli technology in agriculture and irrigation to the Indian situation. And I want to tell you, when I came to India 30 years ago, there was no any dripper, there was only sprinkler. And in the last 20 years, 15 years, the biggest irrigation revolution is now in India. I'm saluting to the Indian farmer which they shift from flood irrigation, which is very not good irrigation system. You lost almost 60% of the water fertilizer, and they shifted to drip irrigation. Now, drip irrigation is not dripper. Drip irrigation is a system, as I told you in the beginning, means when you say drip irrigation, you mean fertigation, meaning giving the fertilizing during the irrigation, which enable the farmer to get 3 times at least more yield and income. We and Gen Irrigation decided to really lift this revolution to India, and thanks to the Indian authorities, mainly the government, they are giving subsidies to Indian farmers to shift from flood irrigation to drip irrigation, while the water, they are not paying for this. This is something miracle, really miracle. And today, India water market, especially in irrigation, is the biggest in the world. Is more than $1 billion.
Mr. Offen, we are here to praise the Israeli Agritech, and you are praising the Indian Agritech.
No, what I want to tell you, the Indian farmers are not different than the Israeli farmer. The Israeli innovation or the Indian innovation is not exactly changed from ours. As I told you in the beginning, and Lal said it, we know how to combine, to make integration in all the factors which influence in the agro sector. In the most of the world, people focusing on one element. So if you ask me, beside the technology, what we are bringing to India is the concept of thinking, the concept of integration, the concept of holistic system, and this is what will bring India to doubling. You know, Modi is asking the Prime Minister doubling the agro yield. So with the Israeli technology, but with also with the Israeli philosophy, how to deal with agriculture, we can do it. So technology is okay, but we have to learn to educate the Indian farmer how to use it. Next step is now how to use fertigation, and I can tell you, and since we'll speak later on about entrepreneur in Israel, I will advise Israeli entrepreneur to invest in Indian startup companies.
Mr. Offen, many of the audience today with us are Indians, and I'll tell all of you a secret that Mr. Offen is the one that makes prime ministers. Whenever he has a guest in his office, he is gifting them with a special plate, and after that they become chief ministers, prime ministers. So make sure that when you come to Israel, go and meet Mr. Offen, because that will ensure that you will reach far. Thank you, Mr. Offen. I'd like to pass the mic back to you, Adi. And most of the venture capital in Israel are investing in technology, telecom, some in biotech, now in green energy. Very few looked at Agritech as a viable investment. And you are among the pioneers to go and found an agriculture fund, AgriNation. Can you elaborate about maybe the difficulties, but more interesting for me, what kind of interesting investments you have done?
So I came to agriculture from both passion, but also from a clear business opportunity. As you mentioned, I'm both entrepreneur, started 2 companies, but also an investor. So when I entered to the market, I saw that back then, about almost 8-10 years ago, there was 250 projects, but in the back end of those projects, there were already $4 billion companies each. Between them, we can name ICL, Adama, Netafim, and this without any, VC or tech money that pouring into the ecosystem. So on the one hand, we have a lot of technology. On the other hand, we are very, very strong industry, and the companies that I mentioned are world leaders in their field. We either drip irrigation, chemicals, crop protection. So something we're missing in the middle, and the missing piece was actually to create the ecosystem that we are seeing today of more VCs and angel investor. As someone that has some history in the tech industry, when you're going down here on Rothschild Boulevard, which is like the Wall Street of New York, back then, 10 years ago, there was no one that invested in this field. So I found it of an interest that we have a lot of technologies, we have really big companies, but nobody is giving the funding, and this is where I found the business opportunity. Also back then, the valuation were very, very good valuation. So you can do a very nice business out of it. Our investment, our first investment was in company back in 2016 called Groundwork. What makes this company so unique is actually what was mentioned here, but all the panelists. The first, that the company is based on 25 years of research from Volcani Institution, which is Israel leading government institution for agriculture research. The second is that the company team, the team was a team of serial entrepreneurs that already sold their companies to tech companies, to Samsung, and they were looking for the next big opportunity, and they found it in agriculture. So we have strong technology, great team. And the last piece in this puzzle was that the company manufacturer technology was aimed for corn and soy, which is probably everyone here around the table knows that these are the largest crops around the table. So Groundwork actually has a manufacturing technology to increase yield using beneficial fungi that they can create it with a very low cost, but with a very high concentration. India is actually the place in the world where this fungi came from, but Israeli technology is where we can scale it and make it so efficient. And today, this company is actually selling in around the world, in India, in the US, in Brazil. And beside AgriNation, we have other funds from the US and Israel involved in these investments. I also would like to mention Tropic Bioscience, which is a company that recently closed round B led by Temasek. Although the company is located in the UK, the entire management team is Israeli. We decided to start the company in the UK because we have a small bridge of opportunities there from the government. Just to give the context, Tropic Bioscience is doing genome editing in tropic crops, coffee, banana, and now we are moving forward toward rice. So this is another opportunity that we invested in. And of course, we're looking to invest in more companies that will be a disruptive technology in the agriculture world.
Thank you, Adi. Thank you. Mr. Mal, I see how your brain is working when you're listening.
Figure that out.
So we together have started the Agribator Center some few years back. Since I'm the moderator, I'll be happy if you can elaborate what we're doing in the Agribator.
The Agribator, the name came from Agricultural Tech Incubator. So Agribator Technologies is based in India, and on a very simple idea. India's 440 total million acres, 330 irrigated and so on, need a lot of technology to get to their full potential. Currently, this area produces about 25% average, in spite of the best water, land, sun, etc. So India is desperately a market for agtech. More, you can add those millions and millions of acres of land under hill cultivation, orchards, etc., etc. So, and there was no organized bridge, so to speak, between Tel Aviv and Delhi to do this. Secondly, you needed an entity here in India that could become the funnel and, in a sense, be the touch point for aggregating demand for Israeli supply. I mean, demand for tech, supply of tech. And clearly, I think
I just want to interrupt you in 1 second. And I need to mention that Israel founded over 29 or more centers of excellence in India for horticulture, for milk, and so on, sponsored by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the embassy in Delhi. So there are centers for excellence in India. And if people would like to see Israeli technology and agriculture practices, they're welcome to visit those centers of excellence, which are spread all over India. Just wanted to add this point to your talk, Mr. Malu.
So, yes, and the COEs, as we call them, have been successful to the extent that they are a showcase of technologies that Indian farmers or Indian businesses in farming can hope to adopt from Israel. The gap still remains that we need to promote Israeli technology to the masses of India, and in every which way, vertical farming, horizontal farmings. Let's just look at Amur. I'm not mentioning this. The Indian policy of the Prime Minister talked about doubling farmer income. Now, doubling farmer income cannot happen unless technology reaches the farm. On the other hand, the average Indian, the P&L and the balance sheet of an Indian farmer is too little to buy technology. You need a pipeline to get technology to him on a pay-for-use basis, which is what we are propagating as an idea. EM3, my other company, is doing exactly that. We get machinery in a service form to any farmer from half an acre to 50 acres, and we charge per acre. The machines are ours, the operators are ours. Now you've taken the capex load away of technology or mechanization, away from the farmer. And therefore, we hope that this is the right strategy to get technology into the Indian soil. And there are many, 2 or 3 large problems of Indian farms I would like to talk about. First and foremost, I think the days of test tube based soil chemistry management are history. We need to look at remote sensing to be able to do that for the right farmer. The days of visually inspecting plants to figure out whether they are going to be infected, are infected, etc. are history. We need remote sensing to do that as well, cameras, etc. And I'm absolutely taken in by these surge of new technologies in Israel, which are directly applicable to the Indian farm. In 4 to 6 months, I predict that there will be at least 2 or 3 large ventures in India operating on these major needs of India. So I'm sorry, this is going India-centric, but
we are here in the Israeli Agritech session, and but still, the needs are in India. The solutions come from Israel, and you rightly mentioned the needs and the solutions that we will give. And I'm going back to you, Or. Rajasthan is maybe even bigger than Israel, and it's a desert, and I'm sure that they will appreciate the development that you do in your area. If you can share with us what recent investments or deals in the pipeline that you have in desert agriculture which are of interest and you would like to share with us.
Definitely. I think that at the end of the day, when we look at the issue of growing desert climate around the world. The UN has placed it as one of the major issues that humanity has to face. And you combine it with obviously the growing population and with issues such as unknown factors such as pandemics or different things, we realize that we need to be a lot more efficient. And I think that one of the great things when you look specifically at agriculture in the desert, you have to be very, very lean. You have to be very precise. One of the amazing things that was developed in the Innovation Center in Ramat HaNegev is a solution for, specifically people talked about water. So not in irrigation, but how do you use water? So as you know, in deserts, you have brackish water for that matter, different kinds of water that you aren't necessarily able to use as is if you pull it out of the ground. So one of the things that they developed is technology of focusing everything and combining water, let's call it in simple words, right? Water you can't use with a lot of different additives and combination of other types of water, and then send it specifically to the type of crop that needs that specific mixture. Okay, so that allows them to use, again, brackish water. And as of now, for example, there is a water desalination plant that produces 3.5 million cubic meters of high quality water, again, in a very unique intersection that not just makes this water usable, but it's being produced specifically for a specific type of crop. So I think that operating lean, any technology that allows you to do more with less is great. When they asked a great entrepreneur, the founder of Amazon, they said, how do you know what technology to invest in? He says, well, I don't know, but I know one thing. People want to buy things for less money, not compromise on the quality, and get it as fast as possible. So if I invest in technologies that allow me to achieve that, that's probably in the right direction. So I think that what we're looking at right now, especially when it comes to desert farming and agriculture, is things that help us to operate more efficiently with less. I think overall it's a good thing for Earth also to do as population grows and everything. So things such as precision agriculture, and there's obviously many, many aspects to that. Data, everything that has to do with data, big data, collecting data, analyzing data, things that has to do with communication. A lot of people don't see it, but we have companies that apply to work with us that are essentially, you would look at them and say, oh, this is a communication company, or for that essence, a satellite, company. So these companies most definitely define themselves as agriculture field and very, very relevant. Also things that have to do with autonomous or robotics. We have a company, amazing company. We lead the official program for the Italian government together with the Intesa San Paolo Bank. And with many, many companies from Italy. Italy is also a great hub for agriculture and food. And a lot of those companies are coming here. And we had an amazing company come here that do precision agriculture from nano-encapsulation, a lot of innovation when it comes to that as well. So I think that when you put all these verticals together, precision, data, communication, autonomous, that allows you to scale, do less with more, or more with less, I think we have an amazing mixture here. And one of the things that I was very surprised to see is the cross-vertical companies, technologies that, again, you wouldn't put them under agriculture necessarily, but today, as you have a field that is covered by, wireless devices and drones, and suddenly your, low-tech farm has to have high-tech solutions for communications and infrastructure, different things. People didn't think about it before, and said suddenly, whoa, I have a high-tech lab in front of me. I have to have high-tech solutions. For example, one of the immediate things that Ramat HaNegev did, now that it's growing technologically and applying a lot of technology into their farms, is to wire the entire region with high-speed internet wires. You wouldn't think about it, but that's infrastructure that without that, you can bring amazing technology, but it'll collapse or wouldn't be able to hold the bandwidth. So I think that that's a very interesting aspect that we're seeing right now.
Wow, thank you. We spoke about Ramat Negev, and in year 2006, there was in Israel an exhibition called Agritech. And actually, it's an exhibition that every 3 years happens here, a mega event, people from all over the world. And in 2006, we had Mr. Modi as the chief minister of Gujarat at that time visiting us, and Sharad Pawar and Vasundhara Raja from Rajasthan. And we took them to Revivim, a kibbutz in the south of Israel, where they grow olive plantation. And Mrs. Vasundhara Raja, at that time chief minister of Rajasthan, said, I wanted to come to Rajasthan. And next thing, they had a plantation of olive trees in Rajasthan. And it's now, I would say, more than 10 years, and they have olive oil in Rajasthan, which was originated from Israel. So definitely a lot of things India and arid areas in India can take from the knowledge that was developed in the desert in Israel. We call it Negev. Yes, Amnon.
Anat, I will interrupt you. I remember very well this visit. This time nobody knows who is Mr. Modi. And I'm taking this olive plantation in India, which is not a great success.
Okay.
It's not a great success because olive is very delicate crops, and those who did it in Rajasthan didn't do it like in Ramat Negev, new varieties, and some places few it's success, in other is not success. So it's good that they want to do it. This is bring me back to my point. What in Israel is not, it cannot be exactly implemented in India. So I remember very well the olives. I took part on this, but I cannot say that it is very good success. One success I want to mention, you know that in Israel, we developed irrigation system which we can grow rice by drip irrigation.
Rice with drip irrigation.
Rice, paddy and rice by drip irrigation. So less water, less disease, and the climate conditions are better. So when you speak about desert, synonym name to desert is drip irrigation, because drip irrigation was established and found in the desert of Israel.
Thank you, Amnon. We have 2 minutes left, and we have a question from the audience. How do we contact Israeli companies for getting trained on high-tech greenhouse farming? And can you please guide us with some links or website for contacting them? So first, you have our embassy and consulate all over the world. In India in specific, we have an agriculture expert that is in the embassy itself, which can guide you. There are programs by Mashav of Foreign Ministry, which are giving guidance, including in the centers of excellence. You can also contact myself or any of the panelists today. In the publication of this session, we posted there all of our LinkedIn connections, so feel free to contact each of us. Present yourself that you've been in this session and that you would like to know more. I would like to give us a short clip about the Israel as a teaser for you to come and visit us.
Has been around for what, 12,000 years? But did you know that today there are robots that can pick fruit and sensors that know what a plant wants and when? Here are 7 Israeli technologies that are making farming more efficient and more sustainable. Nitzavim is famous for inventing drip irrigation, a system which drips water directly into plant roots. It significantly reduces water and increases crop yields. Today, they offer sustainable turnkey projects that include high-tech greenhouses and advanced control and monitoring open platform.
This open platform wraps up 50 years of experience, put it up in the cloud, use this big data in order to serve every farmer worldwide.
Israel recycles over 86% of its wastewater, by far the highest in the world. The Shafdan treatment plant takes raw sewage, filters it again with microorganisms, and cleans it until it is safe to drink. Taranis is an intelligence platform that uses satellite imagery, aerial footage, big data, and predictive analytics to monitor fields and help farmers make the best decisions.
We can image a field in a really high resolution, about 0.1 millimeter per pixel. That means that we can see a tiny insect on a leaf. And then we can train a computer to analyze it and find these insects or weeds or disease and give the farmer a report. And then we can spray according to this report. Just where in his field we can find the weeds, he can apply spraying just there.
BioBee uses predatory wasps to control insects as a biopesticide. It thereby reduces the need for chemical pesticides by up to 70%. Groundwork BioAg uses tiny microscopic fungi to help plant roots absorb more nutrients. This increases crop yield with less fertilizer.
So the fungus penetrates the plant root. It effectively extends that root in an underground web. The fungus can break down nutrients that are otherwise unavailable to the plant and physically mobilize them into the plant.
FF Robotics makes robots with computer vision that can actually pick fruit straight off the trees. Supplant uses big data and sensors to talk with plants to know exactly what nutrients they need and when they need to be watered. With more people on the planet, we need to grow more food with less water and smarter, cleaner processes. This is the next agriculture revolution right here in Israel.
Okay.
Give you a glimpse of how Israel looks. And we are about to close our panel. I'd like to thank Mrs. Adi Wagman from AgriNation for joining us today. Thanks, Adi. Thanks, Mrs. Narkis Tesler for the really interesting talk about cannabis as a new crop or a growing crop in Israel. To you, Mr. Mal, all the way from Delhi for joining us. All the way from Eilat down south, thank you, Or Chaviv from Arieli capital. And my next door neighbor, anyway, in Naan, Mr. Amnon Ofen, representing Naan, Dan, and Jane Irrigation in Israel. Thank you all for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you in Israel, using Israeli technologies in general and in agriculture. And I'm sure that once this COVID is over, we're waiting for you here in the wonderful Selanova fields that are behind me. Thank you all. And we say here, Shalom and Toda.
Bye-bye. Shalom.
Bye. Thank you.
Shalom. Toda.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.